what will be changed?
Supply chains will get modified.
Why not put it more straightforward, less dependent on China?
It's not really just directed at China.
Where do you find the bargains?
As we started buying, just like the sovereign funds,
What if we fail?
more or less like the flu, we will learn to live with that.
We are navigating in unknown waters because of the pandemic crisis, and you have weathered of various crises during the past several decades. What makes this one different?
Well, this is a completely unique crisis. Their economies, it's unprecedented. Nobody shuts an economy because terrible things happen. Unemployment goes very, very high. People lose their savings. Economies are very complicated. And to restart them, it is not like restarting your car or your motorcycle, where you put a key in and you turn it, it goes on and you drive. It doesn't work like that. And part of the reason people's savings go down because they're not working, that when they're allowed to work, they tend not to spend as much money as consumers. They want to rebuild their savings to make themselves safe. They feel even stronger about that because the world itself is uncertain. So that means there's less purchasing. If there's less purchasing, then you don't need all the things that are being manufactured for you to purchase. So it takes a while before consumers get used to coming back and making money, and that slowness is normal, but it does get solved over time.
You said that the crisis will wipe out $5 trillion of United States economy, which is a quarter of United States 2019 output. And no economists expect a V-shaped recovery in terms of the fundamental economy. But what we see in the stock market, we see a very much like V-shaped rally. So how to understand this kind of discrepancy?
Well, that's a great question. So the reason the stock market has gone up very, very quickly is for two reasons. The first is that there are a lot of very big companies in the United States that have continued to do very well. And those are companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, as well as Walmart, our biggest retailer. Those companies were doing fine anyhow. So part is market overweighting. The second reason is that there's enormous optimism on vaccines. Most people now believe, given the number of attempts and the different types of vaccines that are being developed and tested, that it's likely there will be a vaccine much faster.
The crisis is not over yet. Do you expect what will be the main legacy of this crisis? I mean, what will be changed permanently, even the crisis is over?
Yeah, there'll be many changes, like there always are, when societies around the world go through massive dislocation. One of the changes will be the use of information technology and IT to communicate.
Like what we did now.
Yes, just like I'm talking to you. I think the fact that borders are closed everywhere in the world now, it's amazing. That affects the way people think, and they will make some adjustments. So, for example, supply chains will get modified, and the reason for that isn't that they don't like any individual country. It's because if you've been denied supply for your business and you're highly concentrated someplace and you couldn't get any supply to sell, you couldn't get goods to sell.
So you talk about the supply chain. So you firmly believe that the companies in the future will sacrifice some profit to be more resilient.
So I think this will affect every country in the world. That doesn't mean there'll be massive changes, but it means on the margin there'll be changes. And it may just be that the growth in that company doesn't go to the same place. There'll just be more diversification. But I don't think this will revolutionize the world, but it will happen, in terms of diversification.
Yeah, you use the word diversification of supply chain, but why not put it more straightforward, less dependent on China?
It's not really just directed at China. It's really, if you have all of your supply anywhere in the world and you can't get it, that's imprudent. It's not sensible. And so, there'll be modifications. China, on the other hand, is rapidly internalizing their economy. So that the enormous dependence on exports that China had 20 years ago has dramatically decreased. And the booming nature of China's economy is going to be increasingly handled internally.
If today's globalization slow down or maybe reverse, will we in a better world, richer, safer, or geopolitically more stable?
Well, that's a great question, and you could actually answer any of those three ways, and it depends from whose perspective you're looking. I think if there was a radical change, that would very much destabilize the world. I think if it's a gradual change, it will probably result in some very modest decrease in the global growth rate. If you do that, it may, in those individual countries where supply chains are being moved to, or if it's back to the host country, may create a better politics internally with less anger that may be better for those countries in their form of management. But if there is involved with the process, anger and targeting and disruption of normal relations between countries, that's a terrible thing, because that imperils not just global growth, but a whole variety of other issues which are potentially very disruptive to the global economy. So part of this is in the execution rather than just an outright conclusion, which you were asking me to make.
Let's talk about something about the investment. To investors today, the biggest challenge now is how to put capital at risk with any kind of confidence when the outlook is extremely uncertain. So how?
Well, you have to make certain assumptions about the future, like you do with all investments.
But we know nothing about the future in terms of this pandemic.
Yes, but if you assume that this pandemic has a limited life, because all logic would tell you it has a limited life.
Temporary.
Then you basically have to look at the world and say, what do you think will come back the fastest? What do you think will come back the slowest? And then you decide whether you want something that comes back faster or slower, and it's dependent on the price. Okay? So, for example, we have a large company that today is 100% closed. It's called Merlin, and it's the second biggest theme park company in the world. And we just invested more money in this because we know when they start opening the attractions, people won't come back all in one day. But a year from when they open it, this will be fine, right? So the question is, what price can you invest? Looking at things as if they'll be fine a year from when you're allowed to go back. If you're investing in a restaurant and they only let 50% of it get used, you can't make much money in a restaurant. And so part of it is a bit of a guessing game of when different companies will go back to prosperity.
What is Blackstone doing now? I mean, people always say, do not waste crisis. We see the sovereign fund in the Middle East already start their buying spree. So where do you find the target, and where do you find the bargains?
So what we did at the start is we started buying just like the sovereign funds. We started buying stocks of companies, particularly in real estate, where we knew how good those companies were. The stocks were down 60%, and you buy them when they're down 60, and you wake up a few weeks later and they're only down 30. That's pretty good. So the first thing you do is you buy stocks and also debt securities, in technical called securitizations, of different types of real estate, knowing that for technical reasons they were very beaten down, and then you buy them and they pop up, in large part because the government was pouring money to stabilize that. And so we invested very large amounts of money in those type of investments. It takes a while before we can buy companies or real estate properties because nobody wants to sell them at the bottom, right? So that will take a little while for us to do. We also have the opportunity to make rescue lending. So you have to have a view around the world of what's going to happen, and you start deploying money on that basis. And so we have more money at Blackstone, my company, $152 billion that's not invested now.
Final question, Steve. In today's talk, you are very optimistic about the humankind will get the vaccine. The question is, what if we fail?
Well, if we fail, which to me is unimaginable, just because I've talked to a lot of the people who are working on these things. In other words, it's just not television for me or reading a newspaper. But if we fail, then we end up in a world that is filled with social distancing and sort of a much slower economy. That would be sort of quite unfortunate. I think we will look at this out 5 years, more or less like the flu. Sort of a worse version of it, and we will learn to live with that. That's not how I wanted to end this interview. But I'm not trying to be optimistic or pessimistic, but I think we will find a way to get through it.